Right.
The Webbs came.
Oh, sure, yeah.
H.G. Wells.
Yes, he was leftist too.
Yeah. He was a socialist. George Bernard Shaw said he had become a socialist before Lenin
That's right.
did. And yeah,
That's right.
it's really very interesting.
Yeah. That's good.
I didn't realize that Intourese was founded in 1929.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Apparently, there's very little archival stuff about them. To keep an archive, but there was a kind of umbrella organization that was called VOKS. VOKS was the acronym. I can't even remember what it stood for. But that was the kind of major agency that oversaw all of this.
Right.
It got purged in the late 30s. Disappeared.
Folks, thanks for coming today. So, Chris Brownbag. Let me tell you about a few additions to our schedule before I introduce our speaker for the day. Tomorrow, Mohammed El-Habiri in the economics department has let us Shanghai a couple of his PhD candidates. They're from the Al-Farabi Kazakh National University. And so they're here working with him, and they're going to be sharing with you some of the results of the research. And it's all about economics in Kazakhstan. So the first one is on history of taxation in Kazakhstan, and the other one is on income inequality in Kazakhstan. And I think I sent out a note saying that Russian is going to be the working language, but they're actually going to do it in Russian and translate it into English. And then on Friday, I also sent a note out this morning. We found out that there's a movie being shown, a film being shown on Friday evening over in Union, and that's called Mysteries of the Jesus Prayer. It's about Orthodox Christian monastic life in Egypt, Greece, Transylvania, Ukraine, and Russia. And so that's going to be in the Alderson Auditorium at Kansas Union. You have a chance to catch it. It's going to be pretty good. Our speaker today is Alexandra Novitchkova. She is a Fulbrighter here at University of Kansas. I think you arrived in the fall, right?
Like mid-August.
Okay. And she is a senior lecturer at the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy in Kyiv, Ukraine, where she has a Master of Arts in Political Science from it. She's continuing her study of political science and political theory. So she's here to share with you some of the results of her research on Ukrainian identity.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Chris, for letting me do my presentation. So that Ukrainian identity, it's something that everybody speaks but nobody sees. It's like very vague concept. So everybody speaks about importance of identity formation, of patriotic education, of Ukrainian language, about ban of Russian language, and importance of European identification. But that's like Ukrainian public rhetoric, and there is I'm starting with defining nation for in terms how it's used in Ukraine. So I'm departing with the study of Anthony Smith, National Identity, because it was the first book about ethnicity and nationalistic studies translated in Ukrainian in 1994. So common assumptions for fundamental features of national identity, it's like historic territory of homeland, common myth and historical memories, common mass public cultures, common legal rights and duties for members, common economy with territorial mobility for members. So Anthony Smith defines nations can like a named human population sharing historic territory, common myth and historical memories, a mass public culture, a common economy, and common legal rights and duties for all members. So far, no word about language. Let's come to the national identification from the other side. Jacques in his book of Postmodern Conviction, a report on knowledge written in 1979, proclaims end of epoch of modernity with its grand narrations, or meta-narrations. Among them is nation, teleology, and of history and reductionism. And this means like plurality of language games and pluralism in general. So the question is, can we build a nation in the contemporary world based on modern values? Modern, epoch, not contemporary. So in 1991, Ukrainian got an independence. It has a huge colonial heritage, so it was reflected in artificial mapping on territory. So same Crimea, Novorossiya, Kursk region, Transcarpathian, they were inhabited by not ethnically Ukrainians. The population was all very mixed, or originally it wasn't even Slavic population, the territory populated by Slavic people. And there were like hard language issues. Since Ukraine granted automatically citizenship for everybody residing in Ukraine on the date of the proclaiming of independence, that's 24th of August 1991. So there were no other criteria except for territorial, how to be a member of Ukrainian nation state. So I think we obtained like state before forming nation. Fields of modeling identity in contemporary Ukraine includes like state policy, scholar thinking, and intellectual discourse like poets, writers, publicists, etc. So, what is Ukrainian policy for modeling national identity? In Constitution, Article 11 proclaims that the state is responsible for assistance and promotion of the consolidation and development of the Ukrainian nation, its historical consciousness, tradition, and culture, as well as development of ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and religious originality of all native nations and national minorities of Ukraine. So, in the Constitution, which was accepted in 1996, on the 20th June, national is equal to ethnic. During Leonid Kuchma presidency, Leonid Kuchma is the second Ukrainian president who was in office from 1994. He proclaimed support of Russian-speaking population, and his discourse was to introduce Russian as second official language in Ukraine. Now in 2012 we still have only one language, and in my opinion it's highly beneficial for Ukrainian identity. But nevertheless, Russian is very important in political discourse and party competition to gain presidency, to obtain the most places in Verkhovna Rada or Ukrainian parliament. So in 1999, Leonid Kuchma initiated governmental decree from 15th of September 1999, National Program of Patriotic Education of Citizens, Promotion of Healthy Style of Life, Development of Spirituality, and Enforcement of Moral Values of Societal Basis. It was terminated on governmental decree in 2002. We can see that it's also it's not based on ethnicity. There were other presidential acts from 2001 and 2002 about development of Ukrainian Kazachstva, and presidential act of concept of pre-induction training and military patriotic youth education. So the idea of Ukrainian nationality was very militarized because Kazakhstan, that's a part was formed by so-called Ukrainian medial, by Cossacks, Ukrainian medial warriors. During the presidency of Viktor Yushchenko, which started in Orange Revolution in 2005, by decree of Minister of Family, Youth and Sports of Ukraine, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, and Minister of Culture and Minister of Education, the concept of national patriotic youth education in the frames of state program Ukrainian Youth was accepted for 2009-2015, but it was never implemented. And like keyword, as you can see, it's national, Ukrainian connotation, national is ethnical. So it was emphasizing as well on meaning that Ukrainian nation is Ukrainian ethnicity, and actually making some research on the internet, I was unable to find the full text of this conception. But I assume it was published in Урядовий Courier and then maybe take off official sites or even have it there for several reasons. The most interesting is the presidency of Viktor Yanukovych, who was rival of Viktor Yushchenko during the Orange Revolution, and who was elected in the recent presidential election in 2010 in February, and who has enormous support from the Russian-speaking population and from western part of Ukraine. So, Zerkalo Tizhnya, or Mirror Weekly sort of, it's maybe the most highly reputed political analytical paper in Ukraine, published concept of the statewide social program of patriotic education of population for 2013-2017 for public discussion on 2nd March of 2012. So it's very recent. It was published with the commentaries by Vyacheslav Grinevich, who is the emeritus professor in the frames of Ethno-National Studies Institute of Academy of Science of Ukraine. By the name of the institute, you can say that ethnic and national is somehow divided. But still he has criticized, and you'll understand later from the table. Actually, the concept, I haven't found this concept, the text of the concept either. But after the publication in Zerkalo Tizhnya, it's widely discussed on the internet. The problem is they have published the text, but they haven't published the authors or the source it's come from. And the most important, it's claimed to appear in September 2011. The article is published on 2nd March of 2012. So for half a year, nobody knew nothing about it. And if it wasn't for so highly reputed analytical paper, I'm doubting anybody will keep attention on this. So according to this paper, the budget should put at about 40 million hryvnia, or approximately $4 million. That made 1% of Ukrainian state budget. And comes, as always in post-Soviet environment, to Deriban, Откат, и распил. I can't precisely translate them in English. That means that if you obtain some money, you need to put a part of money to the person who gave it to you, because you can't give this money officially to anybody. So, and then you can spend the rest claiming that you have spent more. So, the idea of this concept of national education and development of patriotism among the population was that all the burden should go to the local organization. And they claim certain criteria that the part of the first one, for example, part of the population that undoubtedly identifies themselves as patriots, they have de facto numbers from 2010, and it's like 31%. But provisionally they state this, like the data for 2013. With this concept, they like predicted amelioration for 37, then 42, then up to almost 48%, like, of people being patriots in Ukraine. But the question arises, there is a lot of people in Ukraine who is not like live in Ukraine and has all the meaning to live Ukraine. So no sources for these figures. The next one is the part of the population which is proud for their state. This concept also states that it's possible to ameliorate with spending money on some festives or some books publishing. The most interesting figures are like, is the part of population which is proud for state national literature and art. It's 9%. The problem is that they have taken like Ukrainian classical literature, I think, because like everybody hates literature they studied at school, like mandatory literature they have read in school. And apart from mandatory literature read in school, in Ukraine there is only few books which are promoted as national literature, while there is a whole range of quite popular, even in Europe, authors who write in Russian. And they don't include this literature and to the idea of national pride. And there is something we can be proud of. But I'll speak about literature a little bit later. Part of population which is proud for state military power, that's 3%. And if you speak to any Ukrainian mother who has a son at late teens, asking, what do you think about sending your child to an army? She said, no way. No way. And this is the problem. Ukraine started as a nuclear weapon country, as a Soviet heritage. She resigned this idea of being nuclear power, of keeping nuclear power, because for one reason it's extremely expensive, and for the other reason, in exchange, Ukraine obtained enormous economical help. But still this concept is longing for being successful. Ukraine need to be a military power. And for example, Costa Rica has no army at all. And all the Costa Rican I have chance to speak with, they're very proud of this fact that they can, instead of putting money in military, they can put money in education. And part of the population which is proud for state language, it's 17%. In the last Ukrainian all statewide survey, people who claim they had to speak Ukrainian were like 60%. That's not like even numbers. I think it's about 30% who speaks Ukrainian like on everyday basis, and 20 more or even 25 who speaks so-called Surjik. That's a sort of mixture of Russian and Ukrainian, but still 70%. That's the other thing that you can notice, that they don't use the word Ukrainian. That's state national literature. That's state military power. That's state language. State language now is Ukrainian, but they have the new look of presidential campaign, and the question of the Russian as a second state language is brought into daylight again. So the language, the lexic of the document is not precise, and they use state instead of Ukraine, and the legitimate question, which state? And Yanukovych is known for his like pro-Russian orientation. The other part is Ukrainian scholars on national identity. It's like very briefly, as I've told already, Anthony Smith is a principal author. He's like a huge classic. There is people who are aware of like studies by Benedict Anderson or Dominic Schnapper, but still it's slightly dominated. As well, the model of ethnical nation for Ukraine is dominated, despite pro-Russian or pro-European orientation. So, if we are pro-Russian, that means that we should speak Russian, and that's why we are not longer like Ukrainian, but like brotherhood with Russians and Ukrainians. It's not a nation, it's ethnicity. In the terms of pro-European orientation, if you're Ukrainian, you should speak Ukrainian. If you speak any other language, you are patriotic enough. And simultaneously, they underline borderland character of the historical experience. And as I understood this concept of borderland nation, it contradicts with the idea of the only language nation. So, and the fourth idea in the papers of Ukrainian scholars, that they compare post-colonial experience of Ukraine with overseas colonies. And that on one hand like hurts like people in average, saying Ukraine is not like Ghana or India. Ukraine is a European country, and still nobody refers to Scottish or Welsh or Brittany's experience. So saying maybe the idea of comparison of Ukrainian experience and Irish experience will be more beneficial for Ukrainian identity than comparing Ukraine with the countries that we looking at like third countries and like something undereducated. So what is Ukrainian intellectual sales or natural identity? Here we comes to the language. Ukraine is divided into like 3 parts, not in 3 parts, but in 4 parts on linguistic basis. It's like Russian speaking, Ukrainian speaking, Surjik speaking, and other languages. And other languages, it's not quite consistent minorities, saying that Karaims and Tatar in Crimea and small communities of Bukovines, but that's also Transcarpathian Rusins, whose language is extremely close to Ukrainian and to Russian, and who proclaim them not to be Ukrainian and to be something different. And normally Ukraine is divided on two parts, like Russian speaking, Ukrainian speaking, and minorities. Russian isn't equal Ukrainian, that's for sure, and on the other hand, they are very close culturally. Language identity, as states French folklorist Jean Marcal, it's not based on the language spoken, but it's the structure of narration, its syntaxes you use. And we can say that differences are more sound if we look on folklore, Ukrainian and Russian folklore. For example, such characters as witches, they are rooted in Ukrainian folklore, and they presented in Russian folklore only with the definition Kievan witch. So it's a witch from Kiev who makes her witchcraft on a Lysaya Gora, that's like forestless hill. And witches were introduced to Russian folklore mostly by Nikolai Gogol, a writer of Ukrainian origin who wrote mostly in Russian, but the language was with the high use of Ukrainian expressions and on Ukrainian folklore. The second, we can look on clergymen's characteristic in Russian culture and in Ukrainian. We can compare Pushkin's Kovtala Lop, who is a very narrow-minded clergyman and who was beaten by a very simple man. And we can see it Gogol's characters, for example, Homa Brud. Actually, he was from the same university that I am, and he was studying philosophy, and he was going to become a clergyman. And Gogol characterized him as a very quick-minded man. So you can see there is also different characteristics. And there's also genders of principal fairy tales animals, like fox and dog. They are male in Ukrainian and female in Russian. So the Russian concept of Lisa Patrikeyevna, like a female embodied in fox, which is very quick-minded as Ukrainian clergyman, is unknown to Ukrainian folklore. Fox, it's a like stupid male. So, in her article Language and Authority, written by Oksana Zabushka, she describes the process led by Soviet Academy of Science for unification of lexical fields of Ukrainian and Russian. There is the whole variety of synonyms in Russian and Ukrainian. And what they do, they took the similar one to Russian from Ukrainian, and they put it on the first place in dictionary, and they encourage people to use them. They changed slightly the usage of syntaxis patterns in official documents. Even now, they have so-called, this is direct translation, which is not originally Ukrainian. But if you refer to official dictionaries issued after 1933, they state it's literal Ukrainian language. So you should use literature language, not colloquial. They have several orthography written in 1928 so-called Kharkivan orthography, composed in Kharkiv or Kharkov. It was very Ukrainian-oriented toward western part of Ukraine. It was based like on the language of Ivan Franko, which is like less known than Shevchenko, but he has written big amount of books, so his language is very well developed. But later in 1933, 1968, 46 and 1960, it was other editions of Soviet Ukrainian orthography, and from the date you can see that 1993 is the year of great famine of Ukraine, which was artificial, and even it's like trying to discuss whether it was genocide comparable to the Holocaust or it was just a general artificial famine to broke rural population, not exclusively in Ukraine but as well in Russia, in Belarus and other Soviet republics. In 1993, it was published the first Ukrainian orthography of independent Ukraine, but it's mostly based on the project of 1990, and it saying in general is following Soviet Ukrainian orthography. There were a few projects in 2003 and 2008 to write new orthography, but they weren't never realized. So we still use same Soviet orthography, which is quite close to Russian. And as for grammar and synonymous row, it's somehow different. But if you compare syntaxes, it's almost the same. If you know how to write correctly and to put commas and semicolons in Russian, no doubtly you'll do the same in Ukrainian and you're fine. So the Ukrainian was disrooting, as writes Alexandra Novitchkova, and the direct translation was imposed. So now what is important is the formation of philosophical language or discourse. She used word language, and I think it's worthy translated like both way, language and discourse. And its importance of enrooting to formate like духосідлості, духосодлості, to give people the reason to be proud of their own language. So, obstacles for effective creation of philosophical language, from my point of view, is that globalization. Ukraine is deeply isolated from international academical environment. Articles are published in Ukrainian, and it was a huge work done translating only terms in Ukrainian, but the discussion was poorly held. And for example, we have a mistranslation for civil society, громадянське суспільство instead of громадське суспільство. So we have translation of civil society as a society of citizens, while civil society more correctly to translate as society of members of community. So, and sometimes nobody cares. Some professors in my university, they even say, okay, but at least the term is known, and that's okay. It's like our own. We shouldn't translate it like civil society, civil society, цивільне суспільство, like direct translation from English. And the other obstacle is like exclusion from Ukrainian philosophical discourse works in Russian. Like Hogel is considered to be Ukrainian author, but there is still prejudice against contemporary Ukrainian Russian language literature, the Russian literature written in Ukrainian. And the problem is, for example, Dostoevsky, who was like vaguely of Ukrainian origin, it's often claimed to be Ukrainian author. But contemporary Russian language writers residing in Kharkiv, like Andrei Valentinov and Gary Lime Oldie, who writes on Ukrainian material, or like they're writing like neutral fantasy, they're supposed to be Ukrainian, or supposed to be Russian, and nobody studies them in the courses of contemporary Ukrainian literature. Or for example, Kievan authors Spozis Dyachenko, who have written an excellent book about Kievan witches, Vek Vedym, and which was translated into Ukrainian, like the author's translation. They also supposed to be like Russian writers. And Ukrainian intellectuals, especially like the classy writers, they say, okay, fantasy, that's something which won't help us to form philosophical discourse. It's like low-rated literature. But it's still literature, and it's still something that can help to ferment Ukrainian identity. So there is also more aspects to consider, and maybe for my later research, it's collective memory and post-colonial heritage in historical perspective. That's mass public culture and so-called gapы, because, for example, gapы in Lvov, they also listen to Russian pop music, so-called chanson, but they speak Ukrainian. That's very interesting. Also political power, legal culture, and level of governmental confidence in Ukraine. The problem is that for 2 decades we have discourse that we should make Russian as the second state language, and it's only an item in the discussion with Russia. That's not really things to do in Ukraine. This is only to gain like more political credibility for a very short period of time. That's also economical factors. The problem is Ukraine is like 100 something in the world range of countries by their wealth, and before gaining the independence, nevertheless, Ukraine was very rich republic of Soviet Union, and we have no wars and no major native disasters after Chernobyl, but Chernobyl was like Soviet times. And how to build one language subject in bilingual and multilingual subjects culture, like in postmodern world. So my preliminary conclusions are the following: like in contemporary globalized world with the postmodern values, it's highly questionable to build a modern nation. So Ukraine should be striving to find a new way. Then it's worthy not to alienate non-Ukrainian speakers. So it's to avoid the idea if you speak Russian, it means that you are not a patriot. You can be a patriot. You can not to speak Russian, but you can want your children to speak, you can not speak Ukrainian, but you can want your children to speak Ukrainian. And I have a lot of friends whose children are speaking Ukrainian, while parents speak in Russian. And step by step they are starting to speak Ukrainian in family because, okay, but when it's like the child is 2 years old, you can speak other language amongst you, but then you speak one language with this between spouses, and you speak other language to a child, so your child will quote the language of the spouses. Then the other conclusion is not self-isolating by promoting solely Ukrainian as a science language. For example, to defend a thesis, you need to have from 3 to 5 publications in so-called magazines approved by VAC. If you have a publication in highly reputed Western or American journal, no way it can be counted. So it should be changed. And there is also, actually I forgot to mention, there is a possibility to post-production in Russian language not as product influenced by Russia, but as a product that can potentially influence Russians. Saying writing books in Russian, that's not something that you, not a Ukrainian patriot. No, you can be considered as patriot if you write about the importance of self-determination, or importance of making your own choice, or importance of Ukraine to be independent state. And then Russian readers will eagerly read your like fantasy or science fiction, and they won't consider Ukraine anymore as a part of Russia, as a part of Mother Russia. So this is, I think, also very important, not only to construct idea of Ukrainians inside Ukraine, but to export the idea that Ukraine is a nation, even if it doesn't speak solely one language. But still, it's a nation, and you should consider it being a nation and not a part of Mother Russia. So that's it. Thank you very much.
I wonder if you could give us some insight about how much are these modern media, especially the internet, how much is that